So before I introduce Roger, just a few things. He has worked in many areas, and he has accomplished a lot of things. And though his books are connected, if you go through them, you see the connections. They do cover various topics, which I find very interesting, because many authors and thinkers are only in one area. Roger seems to be going deep in many areas, which I very much admire. In 2017, Roger was named the world's #1 management thinker by Thinkers 50. I think in 2019, you dropped down to #2, but it's still like really good. And you're a trusted advisor to many CEOs of companies such as Procter & Gamble. And I think you wrote a book with A.G. Leffley at some point, but also Lego and Ford, among many other companies. You served as the professor and the dean at the Rotman School of Management at University of Toronto. And you were also named Dean of the Year at some point. I think that was in 2013, if I got the facts right.
That's right.
And your latest book is When More Is Not Better, which I enjoyed reading a lot. And we will cover this book throughout this session. Not cover, but we will talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But you've also written many other books, I think in total 11 books, and published a ton of articles on Harvard Business Review. And what I follow, and I urge everyone to follow it, and I will share this with you in our follow-up email, is the work you do on Medium, the free post that you basically share with everyone with your thoughts on strategy, mostly around the topic on where to play and how to win, which I find very interesting. You graduated at Harvard, both in undergrad and then Master in Business Administration, and currently you live in Florida. I think I got everything correct, right?
That all sounds right to me.
All right, so Roger, let's get started. When I was reading your book, and especially comparing it to the other books that you wrote in the past, I was wondering from time to time, what made you write this book, When More Is Not Better?
Well, I think it's interesting, Sohrab. Lots of people do ask me, "Hey, you've written about a range of things. Why the range, and then why this book?" And in my own mind, they all have one theme, and that is a model that is in use in the world that does not produce the results that people utilizing the model wish it did. And so what my books attempt to do is diagnose that model and help people understand why it's not working, and then supply them with a different model. So if I go back to maybe the first book that people would remember before, The Opposable Mind, the model we're kind of taught sort of in leadership is to say, when there's a really tough choice where it's not easy and neither option is particularly great, as a leader, you've got to just buckle down and be tough and make that choice. That's the model. That's widely held and taught. It's like Harry S. Truman, the buck stops here. And I wrote a book called The Opposable Mind that said, no, that model is actually not helpful. In fact, when you have a really tough choice, a leader should say, this is the time for me to step back and refuse to choose, because neither is a good enough choice. Otherwise, I wouldn't be agonizing it. If one was an awesome choice and one sucked, I'd say, hey man, that's easy. I'll do the awesome one. No, here, there's no choice that's particularly good. You must step back and create a new, better answer. Okay, so and you look at all my books through that lens. When more is not better, right? Explored the model of the economy as a machine, a machine that needs to be perfected. And perfected by the pursuit of efficiency. And what I said is, oops, unfortunately, that model isn't getting you what you want. In fact, it's getting kind of the opposite of what you want. Here's an alternative model. The economy is a complex adaptive system, and you should be constantly tweaking it, not seeking perfection, and you'll get better results. So that's how the books are linked. And this one, I just said, hey, there's a model out here that's supposed to be producing X, and it's not. But we keep saying, well, We're not just doing it hard enough. We're not putting enough resources behind the model, just a little bit more, and that'll get us over the top. No, it won't. It'll just make for more extreme negative consequences. So that was the motivation.
That was the motivation. So this overarching theme of exploring models that are very much ingrained in our society and in our brains and result in certain ways of thinking, but don't deliver what we want to, or don't get to the outcomes that we need. And in this case, it was mostly about the society, not specifically an organization, but about a society that needs to have different outcomes than we are currently experiencing. And to just mention this, you were focusing on the US, but when I was reading this from a German perspective, I could identify a lot of the same trends happening here and also in Europe. And I think it's very well exploring. Now, you already started to go into some of the key messages. One, that there is a mechanistic view, the machine, on the economy, but also on organizations. And what are some other key messages that you would quickly want people to know about so that we can dive deeper into the book as a whole?
Well, one message I'd have for people is be very careful of this thing called surrogation, right? So what we often do is have a model where we say, well, I think this is how this works, and then we make a measurement tool of that model, right? Which makes sense because we want to measure if the model is working for us. But then the measure becomes the model. So Wells Fargo, the great scandal, is a great example of that. You know, the model is we'll be better off. Wells Fargo will be better off if we have deep client relationships. That's a good model, I would say, right? And then you say, well, how would we know if they're deep? Answer is, it appears to be deeper relationships are the ones where the client has more financial services products with us. They've got their mortgage, they've got their savings account, they've got their credit card, etc. The ones that have more, we have longer, more productive relationships with. Again, all sensible. And then you have this proxy that says, well, we will use as a way of measuring the depth of a relationship, how many accounts they have, right? Now, if you keep remembering, you know, it's not number of accounts that we're after, it's deep relationships, and this is only one way of measuring it, you're okay. But it turns out that human beings tend to just forget about all the rest of that chain, and the chain of imperfection, as I say, and says deep relationships equals number of accounts. Then you put in incentive systems to get more accounts per customer, and then people start, your employees start opening accounts for people without asking them, because that's an inherently good thing to do, to have more accounts. That's called surrogation, where you forget the way your model works, and you forget that all models are wrong, right? The minute you create a model, you are abstracting from what is real life to say, here's a way of thinking about it. And models are very useful. We model because we want to understand the world more simply and more clearly. But all models are wrong, right?
Some of them are helpful.
Yeah, some of them are helpful, exactly. But if you just remember that they're a model, you're okay. And if you remember that a proxy is a proxy, you're okay, but we forget. So the advice I'd give is to say, don't think the model is wrong of a machine, and be really careful about the proxies you use to determine whether the machine is working the way you want it to be. And what we've said are things like proxies like, how low have we kept labor costs? How much slack have we taken out of the system that we're going to call waste? Those are proxies for us being efficient, but they end up being proxies that make you, in a global sense, less effective over time.
Less effective and less resilient. And we will get into this. Now, just to take this example you provided from Wells Fargo, where a proxy basically became an end to itself and not a means to an end, right? And we see this a lot happening with objectives and key results as well, right?
Yes.
Where initially there's an objective, and if you don't balance out the key results, each of those key results becomes a life of itself, and people forget about the overall objective. So even if you're using more modern and probably even more agile ways of setting goals, you can still run in that problem and that challenge if you're not aware of it, right?
I think that's a really good insight, Sohrab. I mean, I think that happens all the time, and that's why I tell people to just kind of hold their models kind of more delicately and loosely than they tend to, because kind of no model, no measure is going to be kind of perfect on its own. It's the way you apply it, and I think you'd probably be the first to say, I think you can destroy a company as fast as anywhere else by applying agile wrong, right?
Absolutely.
In some kind of completely doctrinaire, inflexible way. And as an agile enthusiast, you'd say, oh, that's a terrible thing. This tool was supposed to work the following way, and you're supposed to think of the following way. But the person at the other end was saying, I'm going to do it in the most kind of doctrinaire way. And that's why great chefs don't follow recipes, right?
Yes. Famous cook.
Great chefs have a recipe in mind, but given the ambient air temperature, the ingredient happens to be a little bit different this time. We're going to be eating at this point. They're all modified, and every model needs to have that careful consideration with the thing in the back of your mind. A model is just a model. It's not right. It's just a way that hopefully I will be helped. So don't have the model rule me. I must rule the model.
Exactly. I must use the model to think about certain things in a systematic way and then see along the way whether it makes sense or not. So I love the chef analogy that you provided, because a chef doesn't measure how much sugar and salt and whatever. They are going to constantly taste how the food really is, and then they will inspect and adapt along the way. So you mentioned another thing while you were giving us some of the key messages of the book, and that was the concept of a complex adaptive system.
Yes.
So those of you who are more familiar with the agile space, and if you've done your reading, you probably are familiar with complex adaptive systems. But I wanted to hear from you, Roger. How do you define a complex adaptive system, and where do you see them? You mentioned this in your book, and I would like to have you share this with other people here as well.
Sure, absolutely. So, all three words kind of matter, right? Which is, it's a system. So when you have a system, you can't just tear it into pieces and reassemble it and assume that it'll be the same. The pieces are representative of the whole. It operates as a whole. It's complex, and by that we mean that the cause and effect sequences aren't perfectly understandable and linear. It's not like a gas pedal where you press the pedal and the car necessarily speeds up. It may be that in many complex adaptive systems, you press a given pedal and the system speeds up 3 years from now in a way you didn't expect. And then maybe most important, because you could say it's a complex system, but that would not really describe it entirely. It's a complex adaptive system, which means that the players in the system are always adapting to whatever the system is doing at a given time and whatever incentives that creates. And again, it doesn't even have to be a human. A rainforest is a complex adaptive system, and trees grow in very strange ways to get out from the shade of the tree that's between them and the sun. That's adapting to what you've done. And so I would argue that the economy is a complex adaptive system. I mean, I'm an economist by training, so I probably am nastier to economists because I'm not being nasty to somebody else. I'm being nasty to my own domain. But economists get economic forecasting so wrong so much of the time. And it's because the economy is a complex adaptive system. It's really hard to figure out what causes what. The 50 blue chip economists in the monthly blue chip economic forecasts, literally all 50 of them as of December 2008, were still forecasting economic growth for the economy in 2008. Like it's stunning. You have to go back and read them and see what they were thinking about, even though they had 8 or 9 months of already good data and pretty good data in the last few months. They were still, and it was one of, rather than economic growth, it was one of the worst shrinkages in 100 years. So it's complex. The players in it adapt all the time. You know, whenever legislators pass a bill, there's immediate adaptation to it. When Clinton passed the bill that said we're going to put the hammer down on executive compensation, only $1 million. This is 1993. Only $1 million of CEO compensation is deductible for corporate income tax purposes. That'll stop this incredible rise in CEO salaries. What was the adaptation? Pay him $1 million in cash and give him a whole host of stock options, which don't count in this formula. And sure enough, you know, within a very short number of years from that time, 7 years, CEO compensation had gone up 10 times, right? So rather than suppress it, send it down, slow it, it created an acceleration because there was an adaptation. So I wish, I mean, it would be nice, right, if we knew more about how the economy works, what causes what in the economy. It would be nice if people just sort of acted as we wish they would when we legislate things, but that's not what we're facing. It just isn't. It's still taught that way, Sohrab. I can guarantee you, it's taught that way in economics classes, kind of around the world. That this is, you know, you draw these curves and you can predict a kind of output and all of that stuff. It's all just made up, all made up.
I think there's a lot of, and if I say wishful thinking, it might sound maybe too negative, but I think to some extent it's like human nature, because unpredictability is very difficult for us to digest.
Yes.
And then we try everything to somehow predict the future and give us certainty. But you mentioned the economy, which is like a huge thing. And when we go back to what many people here in the audience are dealing with, like individual projects or product initiatives, or maybe even organizational change, none of that is predictable. And we see it day in and day out, where we have our fixed price, fixed budget, fixed time, fixed scope, and it almost never comes in. And then we blame the people. Whereas I think if it happens more than once, it's usually a system failure, or in your words, a model failure, right?
Yes.
And there's one quote.
Can I just say, you're making such good points. I just think that is right. And then if you also add on that, like, then how do they adapt to those fixed budgets, right? Those fixed schedules, right? Because you put that out there, they'll do things like very good people will cut corners because they've got a boss saying, is that piece of code written yet? Is it written? We had a deadline, and the person sort of says, okay, I'll give you it. But did they test it in use as much as they knew they should? No, because they were adapting. Their behavior was adaptive to the structure, which was a boss yelling at them about the code not being ready for the 17th of the month. So I just want to emphasize, you are right, bang on, Sohrab, and there are great sins committed in the hope that we can create certainty where there is no certainty to be had.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there are many great quotes in the book, but one of them particularly resonated with me, and this was about there not being any side effects. There are only effects.
Yes.
Some of them turn out how we want things to be, and then we credit ourselves. And some of them turn out differently than we expected them to be, and then we just say, "Oh, that's a side effect,"
Yes.
right? Now,
Who
can you go
who
into,
could have ever known? Yes, yes,
yeah,
yes.
can you go into this a bit deeper, and maybe also with a few examples of companies, etc., or systems that you provide in the book?
Sure, sure. First of all, again, it's the great insight of if your readers haven't read them, or your audience hasn't read them, you should. John Sterman, the great MIT system dynamics professor, that's his quote, to say there are no side effects. They're just effects that you expected, and effects that you didn't. And you know, for example, I mean, people are in companies are often just baffled by the things that, say, salespeople will do to sell more goods that they shouldn't have been. So they'd say, well, you know, the sales force was selling stuff that was out of stock rather than the stuff that was in stock, and now we have a big problem of unsatisfied customers. And then you look at the compensation system for salespeople, and it's commission driven, and they get the same commission on the stuff that's out of stock than the stuff that's in stock, and the stuff that's out of stock is out of stock because customers like it more than the stuff that's in stock. And then you wonder why there's this side effect, this unexpected side effect of you selling stuff that you're out of stock in, right? It's not a side effect. It's a direct effect of your system, and so you know, it's baffling to me how in incentive compensation we toggle between people we believe people are going to be motivated by it, and they're not, right? So we say we're going to put it in place so that they do more of what the incentive says they should do, right? So that's how people are. They will respond to the incentive, but then they'll stop at a point where we'd wish they would stop. Oh, okay. Which way are they? Are they always going to you know, want to get another dollar, or do they not care about the dollars? If they don't care about the dollars, why did we put the incentive compensation in place in the first place? And if they really do care about the dollars, why would we expect that they suddenly stop and not care about earning another dollar? Those would be examples of the behavior that we wish we didn't have, are examples of what we think of as side effects, but they were simply effects of the system that we put in place. Yeah. I mean, I mean, you know, executive compensation, stock-based compensation. We say, you know, we're going to give them stock-based compensation so that if shareholders do well, they'll do well, right? Well, it turns out that stock-based compensation has nothing to do with that. So the absolutely most intelligent thing a brand new CEO can do, if they're completely bloody minded and care about their stock-based compensation, and again, if they don't care about their stock-based compensation, why did you give it to them? Right? So we assume that they care about it. That's why we give it to them. So the smartest thing a CEO can possibly do, if they really want to make money, is the minute they take over as CEO, they say, my God, now that I'm inside and I've looked under the covers, it's a disaster. Everything is just terrible, awful. We're going to have to do a major restructuring, whatever. The stock immediately tanks, right? Let's say it's 100, goes down to 50. Then the CEO does a whole bunch of stuff that maybe wasn't necessary to do. And the stock goes back up to 100.
Yeah.
And he or she has made a ton on their stock-based compensation, and the shareholders have made exactly zero. So we have these kind of silly things where we're willing to have these very, very narrow models where we think the model will produce the outcome we think it is. Then we say, I'm just so surprised that these other things have happened. Now, it's not because people are stupid, right? It's just because these systems are complex, and the only kind of it's sort of arrogance is the problem. It's not stupidity, it's arrogance. It's the arrogance of believing that we know things more than we really do.
Mhm. Now, I agree with you. Now, I would want to bring in another perspective, maybe even and get your thoughts on this. So I've served also on boards of directors,
Yeah.
and on every board that I've served, we always had challenges of coming up with a CEO compensation, the overall package.
Yep.
And always there was a drive from some people in the room to drive it to like, oh, we need to have clear metrics, and if they hit those metrics, then we know how much they make, right?
Yep.
And I always had the sense that if we only have those metrics, and we just talked about that a measure can become a life of its own, and then it's like drives certain behavior and maybe not the things that we want to see. But my sense was people want to have those metrics in place to avoid difficult conversations, right? Because
Absolutely.
if you are, as a board, are responsible for the CEO pay, my sense was always you need to be able to sit down with them and tell them why you're giving them more money, which is always a pleasant conversation to have, or why you're not giving them the money, which is then a difficult conversation. And if you have those metrics, yes, they make that conversation easier, but for the organization where you ultimately are responsible as a board member, it doesn't make it easier. And maybe it's the wrong thing to do. And I
Yes.
wanted to get your perspective on this, Roger.
No. You're once again, you're very much onto something. Yeah, and the great finance professor Mike Jensen has a kind of an interesting kind of take on what you've said. What he said is, yes, people always want in performance evaluation, whether for compensation specifically or just performance evaluation, they want it to be entirely objective and based on objective quantifiable data, and anything else that they don't like. Anything that's subjective they don't like. But what Mike Jensen points out is that if I were able, so let's say I'm the chair and you're my CEO, if I am able to quantify everything that I want from you as a CEO, I should outsource that job because I can write a service level agreement to get that job performed, because everything about that job is quantifiable, objective and quantifiable. So what he said is, when somebody complains to you about the subjectivity of your feedback, tell them that's the only reason that we need to have you as an employee.
Yeah.
If you wanted entirely objective feedback, then I'm going to outsource you, which is sort of I've always liked that construction. But what I would generalize and say is that this goes back to the cook, right? If you want somebody in the kitchen to follow a recipe out of a recipe book to the letter, you are never going to get an awesome meal. Will you get a non-terrible meal? Yes, probably. You'll probably get a consistent, reliably mediocre meal that will never be terrible. So I would argue that with a CEO, to the degree that you're managing the CEO on the basis of quantifiable, objective measures, you will get a mediocre CEO, right? You'll get somebody who likes paint by numbers, who likes recipes and likes that kind of relationship, and they'll be mediocre. So it's not like it'll be a disaster. You'll just you'll guarantee you have a mediocre CEO, and then you'll guarantee you have a mediocre company. If instead you want to have a relationship as chairman, I want to have a relationship as chairman with you as a CEO that is qualitative in nature, hey, it's not like nothing can be quantified. Some things can be quantified, but it's qualitative in nature, and I'm skilled at running that kind of a relationship. Then we have a chance of having a fantastic CEO. So it's all what you want. Do you want to try for fantastic, or are you willing to accept mediocre? And if it's mediocre, then kind of read John Doerr's book and fill your company full of OKRs.
Okay. So now we started out with the complex adaptive systems,
Yeah.
and we looked at some examples. You provided Wells Fargo, right, and compensation of CEOs, etc., as negative examples on how to not deal with a complex adaptive system. In your book, you also provide a ton of positive examples. Like you go into Four Seasons as one of the most profitable, I think the most profitable hotel chain. Then Southwest Airlines, you talk about I think it's a Canadian banking regulation system
Yes.
as one thing, if I get the name right. And then also your own work at the Rotman School, where as a dean, you try to create something different, right? Can you dive deeper into some of those examples so that people can also get a sense of how to deal with complex adaptive systems?
Sure. So yeah, if I just use the Four Seasons as an example, and yes, it's the most successful, largest, and most profitable luxury hotel chain in the world, started actually by a Canadian, Izzy Sharp, and what I believe the secret to the success of Four Seasons is just understanding that he was managing a complex adaptive system. And so he kind of put in place ways of operating that created connections between things other people didn't connect. So he said, the only way we're actually going to get our hotel staff to be to on a daily basis treat our guests the way we'd like to have our guests treated is to treat our staff that way, right? Which is just it's taking a more holistic view of staff. How do staff think? And we need them to do this. How can we do that? And he also said, well, if we're going to have great staff, they have to actually be around for a while. To learn how to be great staff, and in the industry, unfortunately, the turnover rate is about 70%. So if you meet somebody in a generic hotel somewhere around the world, you can expect you're talking to somebody who's on their way to a 16-month career in that hotel chain. Mm-hmm. Like imagine that. You've got to be rehiring and retraining kind of all the time. He said, well, we can't have that. So, what do we do? Well, they invest vastly more in the selection process, invest vastly more in training, in career paths, so that their turnover, rather than 70%, is 5%. So the average person in Four Seasons is on their way to a 20-year career in Four Seasons. Imagine how much better they can get at their job being a great Four Seasons service provider if they're on their way to a 20-year career. So to me, all of those are saying this is a holistic system where everything relates to everything else, and we've got to think about it. And what I would argue is we got to think about it from the standpoint of human beings, right? What we have to think about is how is it that a human being of the sort we need and want will show up at our doorstep saying, I would like a job with you. And then how is it that human being will stay in that job? And how is it that human being will do the things in that job that we would like them to do? That's a context where you have to delve deeply into that to set up a system around that works for them. You can't set up a system that involves human beings that is non-human,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And shareholder value maximization is one, right? Like there are, I think, really foolish CEOs who think that their workers will leap out of bed every morning because he or she has said, our number one goal is to maximize shareholder value. So they imagine their employees leaping out of bed in the morning and saying, "I'm going to work to maximize shareholder value," and then that employee might ask, "Yes, but who are those people anyway?" And
Who are those magical shareholders?
yeah, right. And the answer, if you look at the share registry, is people like Fidelity, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. Well, that's not actually your shareholders. They're fiduciaries that are holding those shares for somebody else. So you don't even actually know who they are. And then if you ask, well, what's our relationship with those people? Oh, they trade in and out of the stock at will without explaining that they're happy or sad or anything. They just trade it. Okay. So let me get this straight. I am supposed to hop out of bed in the morning to work for nameless, faceless people with whom I have this relationship that is sort of more similar to anonymous sex than a marriage, and that's why I'm supposed to be enthused to do everything possible. And if our earnings in a quarter are down, you'll fire a couple hundred of us to get your costs in shape. I'm supposed to be motivated. See that is the description of a system that doesn't have humanity in it. I'm not saying it's inhuman. I'm not making a value judgment saying that it's inhuman. It's non-human or ahuman. It assumes that you have automatons working for you, and you don't. And that's a key challenge in this modern world. Where Peter Drucker predicted this. He said, he said in 1956, there's this new kind of worker. They're called a knowledge worker. The muscle that they're asked to deploy at work is not their arms, their legs, their back. It's the muscle between their ears. And those knowledge workers cannot dissociate themselves from their work. Unlike somebody who's a physical worker can say, I moved a bunch of rocks, right? When you've got a software engineer, right, their software is them. It came out of their head. It's what they're invested in. And Peter Drucker admonished the world. He said, we're going to have to think about those people differently, as people who, if we need them to use their brain in this way, we're going to need to treat them as if they're volunteering for us, like they're
Absolutely.
a volunteer. And despite that warning so many years ago, which is right by the greatest management thinker of all time, the world is insisting on treating people in this non-human way, and that's getting us what we get. The workers who are disengaged, and kind of being managed by proxies that make them the worst they can be rather than the best they can be.
Yeah. And I think this goes again back to the model that you were referring to, right? It's not only the machine model that we apply to the economy, we also look at every single organization as a machine.
Yep.
Similar to back then when Ford was building cars, like raw materials would come in and then people do certain things and then the cars come out.
Yes.
Today, the product that comes out of many organizations, even if they produce hardware stuff, right? The product life cycles are so much faster than with the Model T, right? That was built for 20 years, more or less unchanged.
Yes.
And I love this quote from Henry Ford, not because I believe it's the right thing, but because it demonstrates so well how people used to think back then. He said, or at least it's written that he said it, it's a pity that if you need a pair of hands, they come with a brain attached.
Absolutely.
And every time I say this to leaders that I work with, they're like, yeah, but right now we don't need the pair of hands, we need the brain. I'm like, yes, exactly. That's what you need. So you have to apply a completely different way of thinking, when you are managing or leading or whatever term you want to use, the knowledge worker, right? And again, even between a knowledge worker, I think there's a new type of worker, because a tax accountant is a knowledge worker, but they do repetitive stuff.
Yeah.
Someone who builds software or creates great user experience design or whatever, like this is like the creative economy is even more complex than the regular knowledge worker that was doing their job. So
yes, I agree. I agree. And if you're interested in reading more about that, read if you haven't already my Design of Business book in 2009, because what I argue is all of that kind of knowledge flows through a funnel from a mystery to a heuristic to an algorithm. And now, ever since the advent of digital computers, once it becomes an algorithm, you code it, right? Which is where we get, you know, kind of AI and machine learning, et cetera. So what you're saying is there's a bunch, there's stuff in the heuristics category where you need a knowledge worker who can deal with the complexity. There aren't rules yet. You need their creativity. It moves in due course, some of it into the algorithm category. And that's what you're saying, these repetitive white collar tasks. And those repetitive white collar tasks are all being, you know, reduced to software, and that is my argument of how the knowledge flows in the entire economy. Everything flows from a mystery. Gee, we have no idea how this works. I mean, it was once a mystery of why, if I let go of this, does it fall down? Right? There were all sorts of theories, animal spirits, all items, love for Mother Earth, all these things, right? Then a smart guy got hit in the head by an apple and said, there's a universal force, Sir Isaac Newton, there's a universal force called gravity that pushes everything down. That's a heuristic. It's no longer a mystery, it's a heuristic. And then we study that enough and find that things everywhere but America accelerate at 9.8 meters per second squared. In America, of course, it's 32 feet per second squared because America is exceptional. And then we have an algorithm, and then because we have that algorithm, Honeywell can create software that gets planes to fall out of the sky in a user-friendly way, right? And you now have automated flight systems. Every bit of knowledge in the world follows that path. Some is still a mystery, and will hopefully never become software, right? What is love, right? But everything's trending in that direction. Now, what people are worried about more than I would worry about is they observe things going from heuristic to algorithm to code and say all our jobs are going to go away. I don't see it that way. The world has an infinite number of mysteries to solve, and we will always need people to solve the mysteries, because it's till they get to algorithms that we can have a computer do something useful with them. But you know, people are worried about that. You know, there was a huge hue and cry in the United States when automatic washing machines first showed up. And the concern was the average housewife in America spent 2 hours a day every day on washing clothes prior to automatic washing machines. And there was a huge concern that they would be at their wits' end for what to do if when they could just throw the clothes in an automatic washing machine.
Yeah, what's
Last
the
time I checked,
the 2 hours?
they figured out lots of more productive things to do, and that's been the story of technology advancement as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, but again, right, even this could be a model that turns out to be wrong, right? And we have
Absolutely.
to see how things evolve over time.
Absolutely.
Now, before we get to some of the last things that you mentioned in your book, I wanted to ask a side question. And we started somehow with this, me asking you, you've written about a lot of things, But one of the main things that I saw, at least in your work and how I connected with your work, was always the topic of strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do you connect this book, When More is Not Better, to your overarching theme of strategy? And what does that mean for CEOs specifically, but even other leaders that have to create a strategy and execute it?
Sure. So I guess the link I'd say is that if in some sense, when more is not better, helps. I would say should help an executive or a CEO, somebody who's responsible for strategy, to take an approach that says strategy is a model, right? So Southwest is a model. Jack Bogle at Vanguard had a model for the business that they then built their business around a set of precepts of that model. When more is not better, it is a warning that don't fall too much in love with your model, because it's going to be flawed, and there's going to be adaptation to it, and so you should be ready to keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking and tweaking your strategy. Now, does that mean redoing your strategy every 5 minutes? No, but it means that you should be always tweaking it, because the forces of adaptation are inexorable. And the likelihood that your model will get all the complex relationships between, I don't know, distribution channel and buyers and cost structure and whatever, the likelihood that it'll get it completely right is about zero. And so you should be watching the signs and tweaking. That having been said, I still disagree with or object to the thesis that says your strategy should be entirely emergent, right? Which is like, we'll just figure it out as we go and change it. I think that's sort of too nihilistic for me. I think you should always say, based on everything I know today, this is my model, and this is where I'm going to head based on that model. But I'm not going to put blinders on. I'm going to say, I'm going to watch and think about it, and also, recognize what John Sturman said, is there will be side effects that you didn't predict. It's just the nature of a complex world.
System, yeah.
Ignoring them, saying, "Oh, that'll go away," is the dumb idea. The best idea is to say, in what way does that thing that I think of as an anomaly, it's not what I expected, what if it is actually going to continue in its current thing? What would I do now to adjust my strategy based on that?
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also, to some extent, like, on what level you define your strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So what I really like, and what I usually teach when I work with people working on products, is a quote from Jeff Bezos: be stubborn on the vision and flexible on the details.
Mm-hmm.
You still need that vision, and you're not going to adapt that vision every 5 minutes just because you heard one thing, right? So you need to give some kind of guidance, some kind of direction where you want to go. But within that, you need to inspect and adapt. And maybe sometimes you identify that your model was wrong, and then you do a bigger adaptation, which is then a pivot, right? Or not. But you need some kind of thing to work towards.
Yeah, and can I just say on the Bezos thing? I mean, in some sense, he's adopting what I think of as a completely flawed management model, right? Which is this idea that, but he's adjusting to it in a good way, right? He's saying be flexible on the details. Well, why would you be flexible on the details? Well, the answer is because at that level, you have strategy choice to make, right? So I'm against the model that said there's something called strategy and then there's something called execution. I don't believe that. What Bezos is talking about is he makes some strategy choices at the Amazon level, and that begets the need to make some more choices. I call those strategy choices. Other people call it execution, but then because other people call it execution, Jeff Bezos has to make this big point about be flexible around that. The only reason you have to be flexible is you cannot specify from your lofty level exactly what choices they need to make, right? Then you'll infantilize them actually, and you'll be wrong. You need to say, do something that's consistent with my strategy, but you're going to have to make choices. So I say the job of senior management is not only to make choices that they are more capable of making than anybody below them, only those choices, and then charter the choices down next level. Say, you guys at the next level have got to make a choice, and the output has to be consistent with my choice. But what exactly you choose, that's up to you. And the reason is you know more about your level than I do. But it's got to be consistent with mine. Right?
Exactly. So
That
you provide the guidance and you decentralize the decision making to where the information is.
Exactly. That's why I say it's like the old expression is turtles all the way down. It's strategy all the way down. You actually, Four Seasons is successful because they ask bellhops to make fundamental decisions.
Yeah.
Right? If that guy comes racing in and says, "I got to be upstairs for a meeting in 2 seconds. I can't. Can you take care of my car?" They have to make a split-second decision on whether to say yes, sir, or to say kind of no, sir. You can't say yes, sir, all the time, because that might be some kind of idiot who's going to do something silly, or it could be one of your kind of great guests who's always been loyal to Four Seasons and just needs a favor now, and the bellhop is going to have to make that decision. That bellhop is trained to make that decision and told, that's the decision. Here's how we'd like you to think about that decision, but the application of that framework for making a decision is all yours. Now, if you're only there for 16 months, how's that going to be made? Terribly. But if you're on the way to a 20-year career, chances are you'll make it well. But that's and Costco is similar. There's an enormous amount of decision making kind of pushed down. And one of the things Costco says is, by the way, we don't hire anybody from outside. So if you're on the shop floor, on the store floor, and you have a track record of making good decisions,
you make it to the next level.
Yeah. And you know what? Then you make it to the next level, and you know what? Someday you can be CEO. Whereas most of their competitors say, we hire future CEOs into our executive development program, from Harvard or Stanford or Wharton or Columbia Business School. Those are different approaches to a complex adaptive system.
Yeah. So, Roger, being conscious of your time and also of our participants' time, I have questions for at least another hour, but our time box is at the end. Yeah. And I want to give you the final word. You mentioned that your reason to write that book was mostly about a model being wrong, and you want to make people aware of that. What I also read a lot out of the book was that we are out of balance as societies, and that we need to recalibrate and find balance again between efficiency and effectiveness and resilience. So there are multiple dimensions, but we are very much in the efficient end. And I want to hear like a few words from your side about this before we close today's event.
Yeah, no, maybe I'll just go back to a story. There are many things in my life that I think I don't really understand or appreciate at the time, and I just store away somewhere in the back of my brain, but they keep resonating. And this was back in the mid 80s, so a long time ago. I was doing training programs on strategy for Bell Northern Research, which was the Canadian version of Bell Labs. And a very clever British engineer who I was working with, we were just talking over dinner one night, and he was sort of explaining to me, you know, kind of because he was an engineer, you know, Bell Northern research engineer, and he was really interested in systems. And he said, Roger, you have to understand that when systems start breaking down for reasons you don't understand, it's typically because they're reaching their limits of their tolerable limits, right? And you can patch this thing up or patch that thing up and think you've solved it, but you haven't. It's running too hot, if you will. And I just salted that away, and that's, I guess, how I feel, Sohrab, is that we're running this to its limits. Now, all the environmental sustainability people, of course, are saying that. They're saying, well, we're just near the limits. That's why bad things are happening, because we haven't left enough, and we aren't caring enough about resilience. So I think that about our economy, right? Which is sort of bad things are going to happen. Big capital market crashes, big crashes of companies, employees, you know, feeling badly. It's because we just aren't being attentive enough to the system, and we're running it hot. And one manifestation of it is pushing the efficiency button so hard. And the interesting thing to me is we just don't need to do it. Right. So the examples I give in the book of the Costco's and the Four Seasons of the world, they're doing it without stress or strain. Right. It's like, you know, if you walk into a Costco, and I'm sure most people here have at least gone into a Costco once, it's sort of like people aren't racing around. The employees are not racing around and the like. It's fairly calm, and it's because they've figured out a human system for getting done a bunch of things in a human way. And if we could just bring back that sort of sense of a kind of a human way of doing things that really kind of appreciate entirely the human, I think we would be backing away from what I feel like a cliff that we're walking towards. And that's my hope for the book, is that will provide encouragement for us to back away and figure the cleverer way to do things rather than the brute force way, because it feels the brute force way is getting us closer to system just malfunctioning a whole lot.
Great words, Roger. Thank you so much for participating, taking time out of your calendar for us. Very much appreciated. And I hope to someday have another conversation with you.
I would be happy to do that, Sohrab, because you do such a good job. So you've been a marvelous host. I really appreciate the work that goes into being such a good host, and I would be happy to do it again.
Thank you so much.
Good luck. Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Take care.